This episode of The Minimalist is brought to you by nobody, because advertisements suck.
The Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields-Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are The Minimalists.
Ryan, it is an election year.
Yes, it is. Who are you voting for?
Of
I'm voting
course.
for Daffy Duck. Or Jimmy Carter. I can't decide.
Every year is an election year.
That is true.
And we always say it's an election year. But no matter when you say that, it's typically true. You're usually going to be voting for something, whether it's city council or something else. And ours is not a partisan talk show. Everyone, I think, knows this who listens regularly. But today we are going to discuss local, national, and international politics. So we thought we'd bring someone in to do that. We're also going to talk about the outrage and divisive nature of our current political climate. We're going to talk about how we can avoid getting caught up in the disarray and turmoil created by tribalism and partisan politics. And we're going to do that with today's guest. Kim Iversen is here today. She's from The Kim Iversen Show. Kim, thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
Now, let me ask you this, Kim. We often say, well, I don't want to get political. And that really frustrates me because the word politics comes from the word that the Latin word that just means the affairs of the people or the affairs of the city. And so if we're talking about politics, I think to some extent everything is political. I think what we're really talking about is I don't want to be partisan because I don't want to offend other people.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously everything in life, especially right now, is political. I think everything's political. I don't think there's anything that isn't anymore. And so, people don't want to make enemies. Or actually right now, though, I feel like people are more inclined to just say, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what I think and I don't care. And if you're not on my team, then we can't be friends. So I'd rather suss it out right now anyway.
Ooh,
that's what I'm noticing this.
That's quite a problem though. It's so exclusionary in a way where it's like, hey, if you don't fit into the same box as me, in fact, we got some questions that sort of dive into this. In fact, why don't we go ahead and start there, because we've got some really good questions that I think will allow us a jump off point to discuss some of these political topics. Our first question is from Christy in New York City.
I'm wondering if you've ever discussed minimalism for government. Particularly interested in reducing government costs. So I'm wondering if you've particularly spoken about that to government officials.
So minimalism and government, or minimalism and politics. And when we talk about minimalism, Ryan and I are talking about living a meaningful life with less. It usually starts with the stuff, then it's about being more intentional with all other areas of our life, right? And so people often think it just has to do with material possessions. I think that's a big piece of it, but a lot of it has to do with too much spending, living beyond our means, etc. Well, who's the most notorious for living beyond their means? And whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, it's often the government. The government's often spending money on things we don't want them to spend money on. However, I think that's why it's important to find the right leadership, that we can have people in place who will spend the money on what we want them to spend it on.
Yeah, it's very libertarian, right, to say, let's be minimalist with the government. Less government is a very libertarian viewpoint. And yeah, I mean, for sure, what we want, I guess it really kind of depends. Those who want maybe larger government and more government spending, but they want it on things that are valuable to their lives, things that benefit their lives. So it does become a problem when you start to look at government and say, wow, they're really spending on all of these things that I don't even know what that's for. Like recently on the ballot here in California, there was this like a measure to add money, more taxation for improving the schools, the buildings or something along those lines. And, a lot of people are sitting there looking at this thinking, gosh, we've got so many other things that we need this money to go towards. And yet we're just adding money to the pot, spending it on all these random things. And so, yeah, I do think that people want, even people that want big government, I think what they want it is to be efficiently big government.
Yeah.
And so they still want that almost minimalist attitude of, well, let's focus and funnel this money into these select areas that are going to benefit our lives.
Yeah.
And then you've got the obvious, like the true minimalist for government, right, who would be almost like an anarchist.
Yeah. It's when I think of a minimalist government, because when we talk about minimalism, it's really about living intentionally. And what you're talking about as far as how the government spends money, that's what I think of when I think of a minimalist government. I don't think of less government. I will be the first to admit I hate regulations. But guess what? We got to have some regulations in place. We have to have people in place to enforce those regulations. So, as a minimalist, I don't think it would be totally insane. It's not like if we were minimalist, if it was President and Vice President Milburn Nicodemus, we wouldn't all of a sudden be like, all right, now people can only wear loincloths or togas. Yes, you can't go into debt. I mean, it wouldn't be that type of extreme version of it. But I think there are some practices that Josh and I have in our lives, that other minimalists have in their lives, that totally would bring about good effects for the country when it comes to spending money intentionally. Now, if you can get everyone to agree on what intentionality means when it comes to spending money, like that's the most difficult part, right?
Well, it seems to me, and Kim, I don't know if you agree with this, but it seems to me that government's role, and this will at first sound like a libertarian position, but I don't think it is. It sounds to me that government's role is to function where the market is inadequate. And I think at first you're like, well, the libertarians would say, the market solves almost everything. But also I think even a communist would say the government should function where the market is inadequate. They just think the market is completely inadequate. And I think we are somewhere in between. We actually advocate as minimalists for balance. We are not hoarders, but we're also not Spartans where we have to get rid of everything and continue to get rid of everything. It's about finding the appropriate balance. It happens to be that the appropriate balance is usually far less than what we thought we needed as individuals, but I actually think it's probably a little bit different in government. And so there is a place for regulation. There is a place for government. There is a place for the market, though.
Right. I mean, for me personally, I'm more, I'm not a libertarian, but I definitely have a lot of libertarian-esque-ness to me, where I'm very into, I like my freedoms and I like less government for sure. But the socialist side of me, which I'm really into the Scandinavian model, is to have that government that works really efficiently. So even if it is seemingly I don't even consider the Scandinavian model necessarily a big government. Yeah. I think that is a minimalist government in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of red tape. There's not a lot of bureaucracy that you have to get through. It's that they've maintained a very efficient government. So you can have a minimalist style government being libertarian or being even socialist. There are actual there's examples of this. You could even say communism could be, when you look at China, it's fairly minimalist,
sure,
even running in a communist style. They don't have any red tape. They don't have any bureaucracy.
Right. Yeah. It's authoritarianism and so
but minimal. It's a lot of authoritarianism, but at least you're not dealing with a big you're dealing with maybe a powerful government.
Yeah.
Well, I think Christy's question ultimately comes down to, because she's talking about government spending here, and I would love to see something, and I hear there are a few countries that do this. I believe Australia is a country that does this, where when you submit your taxes, which by the way are much more simple. The one thing that's not minimalist is our tax code.
Good grief.
And none of us understand it. We have to pay a ridiculous amount of money to an accountant and a bookkeeper just to make sure that we can give the government the correct amount of money right now. Whereas at places like Australia, not only do they do that for you, from my understanding, but you get to understand also where your money is going. And it would be really fascinating if you could vote directly. Now, we're not a democracy, but it would be really fascinating if we could say, you know what, I'm paying $1,000 in taxes this month, and I want this much to go to wars, and I want this much to go toward the homeless, and I want...
Wow, that would be so great.
Wouldn't it?
That would be so great.
You get to choose where your dollars go.
Yeah, and then we would really be voting for what do we value as a society? Where do we want our money to go? And I think it would be such an interesting test case. Gosh, I almost want to kind of create that, like get 1,000 people and make a sheet and say, okay, where would you put your tax dollars, and see where that budget would end up. What do people ultimately value?
Yeah.
Well, do us a favor, if you're watching this on YouTube, just in the comments below, let us know the 3 things you'd like your money to go toward the most. You're paying taxes right now, and this doesn't have to be in America. Only about half of our audience is in the United States. But if you say, I really want money to go X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, and give us percentages.
Yeah, I like this.
Yeah, because you just put 3, because it's not going to be 33%, 33%. Yeah, 33. Yeah, 0.1%.
I want 100% of my money to go toward tanks. We need more tanks.
You always say that. You brought up Scandinavian countries, and I wonder, a piece of me wonders if socialism works well because of the community of people there, or is it because of the government? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. I'm just curious, like, what do you think, Kim?
I think it's both. I think actually governments are a reflection of the people and the values of the people. So if you've got a country like Italy, for example, which I spent quite a bit of time there about a year and a half ago, I love Italy. I love the Italian people, but the average Italian is slightly corrupt, like just in their everyday life.
It's like part of their culture,
right? So if you talk to an Italian, they're sort of wheeling and dealing with you,
like Matt Diavella.
So and that attitude kind of goes into the government. So if they think they can kind of get a little bit of a deal out of you, then if they've become an elected official, then they kind of have that same attitude. Oh. And I think in Scandinavia there's an attitude and just a culture of honesty and trust that and a lack of corruption just in the average everyday, like Swede, for example. Uh-huh. And so when they take that attitude to the government. And we see that here in the United States. The average American typically has a very, what you guys would call like a maximalist, right? Attitude of just gaining as many possessions as we possibly can. More.
I'd agree with that.
Bigger house, enough. More stuff, right? Exactly. More money. We need to, our net worth is where our value comes from and our amount of things. And so we take that attitude when we get into office as well. And that is, okay, now here I'm in a situation where I can maybe take advantage of this and make a lot more money and then maybe get more money from the American people in order to spend on more things. And there's that attitude kind of seeps into the government. So I do think it's more of the culture that creates the government. So in order to change your government, you have to change your culture.
I love that.
It's also a bit of a blended system too. It's not true socialism. It's very free market. With respect to the Scandinavian countries, my wife her family is Norwegian, and I think there's something you said about that. There's almost like this aggressive honesty, and honesty is not even the right word, but and it's not even transparency. There's like this almost, I don't know, moral code. It's the opposite of what you were talking about with respect. No offense to Italians, we're all individuals here. There are plenty of corrupt Swedes and Danish and everyone else, but I think you're saying as a culture. There's something that's different that then bleeds into the government. It's not the other way around. It's not the government enforcing a culture onto people. We all know that doesn't work. You can't enforce a culture. Culture is something that is sort of organic. And so when I'm thinking about these different styles of government, quite often what works is the same thing that works in our lives. It's a blend. It's never going to be perfectly libertarian or perfectly socialist. There are a bunch of different factors that sort of work together to make it work well.
Yeah, balance is key for sure when it comes to government. And, I really appreciate having both sides. In the United States. I mean, of course, I would like even more, when it comes to political parties, I want more political parties, not fewer.
Right.
But definitely, I appreciate that there's a bit of a push and a pull that kind of when we go too far one way, you've got another side saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to go and pull back a little bit and go more in this other direction. Mm-hmm. But definitely when it comes to, we do have to change our attitudes and what we're looking for out of our government. When you look at our country, we're very, we're like a hyper militant country in general, mm-hmm, right? Yeah. So people
are a good word to use.
People really love their guns.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. People really, that's an American mentality that obviously we've taken into our government. We have an enormous military that is going around the world, bullying everybody.
Yeah.
And that's a very American attitude, unfortunately. Mm. So how do we get that to change is the big question. How do we get people to realize what is more valuable in life and where we should be focusing our government and our attention and our time rather than on all of this
That sounds like some questions that a minimalist would ask themselves.
I'm very much a minimalist, by the way. Just so
awesome.
I'm like an extreme
No,
minimalist.
you totally got the memo on the black.
Yeah, right.
Well, hey, Christy, I think the best place to start with respect to finances is not with the government. It's probably with your own finances. So I'm going to send you a copy of our book, Essential. It's an essay collection with 12 different areas of intentional living. One of those areas is getting intentional with your finances. So there's a whole chapter in there about finances. So if you like our podcast, you'll like the audiobook version of Essential, or if you want the book or the ebook, Podcast Sean will be happy to send you one of those as well. Our next question is from Jeremy in Georgia.
I've heard you talk several times about a little bit about politics. I know it's not a subject that's touched on a lot, but I was wondering, are you guys libertarian? And if so, how do you fall in line politically? I know you guys don't like labels, but what exactly would you consider yourself, or what do you think would be more of a minimalistic position on politics? And was just thinking of what you thought of libertarianism.
Jeremy, libertarianism. No, I am a pescatarian. So Kim, this is a fascinating question because people often want to say, hey, what box do you put yourselves in?
Yeah.
But here's what I can tell you is I find it to be dangerous. I don't put myself in a particular box, and that's not a cop-out. And let me explain why, because I think it's so much more nuanced than that. I'll give you an example. Ryan and I, in the last presidential election, voted for two different people. And it's like, how could you two be best friends since you were fifth graders?
And people will tweet us and write us emails. They're like, I can't listen to you anymore knowing that one of you voted for Trump. And we're like, wait a minute. There was more than two people to vote to vote for, right?
Right, and that's the thing. You were just saying a moment ago you wish there were more than two parties. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some third-party options, right? There is the Libertarian Party, and there's also the Green Party, and there's a new party emerging called the People's Party.
Okay.
But
the Whigs?
Back in the day.
We're bringing them back.
Right. We're not really set up to be necessarily a two-party system. We can actually function with more parties.
Yes.
Back when Lincoln was elected, people don't realize this, but there was actually 4 major candidates, and Lincoln won via the Electoral College. He didn't get the popular vote. He won through the Electoral College because it was split 4 ways, and so it just came down to that. We definitely could add more parties. The problem we've got right now is everybody's had to join into these two, and it's so difficult then to put yourself in a box when there's the fiscal side of things, the policy side of things, and then there's the morality side of things. And the fiscal side has seemed to kind of merge into almost one party. They're not really giving us very many options with the two in a lot of aspects. It's like, oh, Democrat or Republican, it's one or the same. And now it's really the differentiation seems to be on the moral side. How do you morally fit in? Are you a Democrat or a Republican in that respect? But we definitely have more nuance. And, people ask me all the time, what am I? Am I a libertarian? Am I a progressive? I identify myself as a progressive, but I'll tell you, a lot of progressives tell me I'm not a progressive. They call me a right-winger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, lots of them.
Wow.
What's fascinating about that is, and I think I see the same thing happen with people who are libertarians. When someone, during we were listening to the question from Jeremy, Podcast Sean was talking about Justin Amash, who is running, I think, for the Libertarian candidate.
He's the first libertarian in the Senate too.
Okay, so he's the first libertarian in Congress, and what I guess true libertarians will say is you're not libertarian enough, right? Or if it's conservatives, you're not conservative enough. Or if it's progressive, you're not progressive enough. And the problem with this, we had Pete Buttigieg on here, and he was talking about purity tests and how when we can't even meet our own purity tests, that becomes a real problem. And that's why I have problems with sort of ideologies, because when you create just these two boxes, which box do you fit? And it's like, well, I fit into that box maybe 20% of the time, and I fit in that box 40% of the time. I don't fit in either box another 40% of the time. What am I supposed to do? And it does feel like, to a great extent, it can be different with this election, say, but most of the time it feels like, okay, which one do I have to vote for? And that's really unfortunate. Very rarely do I get excited to vote for someone, and I feel like I should be excited. I should have someone that I feel really good about. And I don't mean I'm going to agree with you on 100% of the issues. No, what I'm talking about is I feel really good about that person as a leader. Although we might disagree on things, just like you Kim. I really like your show on YouTube because I agree with you 30 to 60% of the time. But I want your perspective. I want to be able to disagree with you because it's either going to help me change my opinion or it's going to help me solidify my own point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I definitely, when it comes to like being a progressive, I have, like I said, I like the Scandinavian model. I'm a real big fan of Sweden. I think Sweden right now, in particular, is like the greatest country on earth.
Yeah.
I want to pack my bags and move there if it weren't dark half the year and cold, But it is difficult to fit into boxes when, as a progressive myself, I say, okay, I'm really into like Medicare for all, and I like a really solid social structure, a social safety net for people. But I'm a big believer in my Second Amendment rights and my right for free speech and my right for, freedoms. I have a real strong libertarian streak. And that makes people say, well, you're not a progressive, and you're not a real progressive then if you don't want to get rid of guns, right? If that's the purity test you're talking about.
And I think we conflate two things, because earlier you said America has a real love for guns. You can believe in the Second Amendment without coveting and loving guns,
right?
And there's a difference there. You're not walking around. She didn't walk in here with an AR-15.
Love people use guns. The opposite never works. No, it's funny. I feel like we are pigeonholed into this two-party system because, Josh, you mentioned being excited about a candidate, and I can think of 3 people in the Democratic primary that people were truly excited about: Yang, Buttigieg, and Sanders. None of which made it to the top. So I fail to understand how we can have these exciting candidates, but for some reason they don't rise to the top. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just in this bubble and I am not aware of why one of those 3 didn't at least, didn't get to the finish line. Go ahead.
Well, I do want to talk about, and I think we'll save it for the maximum. I do want to talk about Biden and Trump, and we need a more private space to talk about that.
Okay, fair enough.
So I do want to get into that. I also want to talk about Sanders and some of the really good things, but also some of the problems that he stumbled into during that campaign.
So the other thing I'm thinking about, the reason why we're kind of pigeonholed into it as well, is that you can't really register as an independent voter in a lot of states. If you register as an independent voter, you don't get a ballot. You get a ballot, but it doesn't have right or left candidates on there. It's like, maybe you can write them in. Is that what you're supposed to do with an independent ballot?
It depends. So each state has, in some states, like for California, for example, you can request a party's ballot. So, for example, I'm a registered independent in the state of California. In this most recent primary, I requested the Democrat ballot, right? Democratic ballot as opposed to the Republican ballot. Now, you could request one or the other. Some states don't allow you. You have to be a registered member of the party in order to vote for but only in the primary.
It's like that, yeah.
And I can actually understand arguments for both sides. Like,
absolutely.
If I am a Republican, why do I want Democrats voting in my sort of primary? But then again, shouldn't we all have the right to vote? Like, I see both sides.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jeremy, I want to talk about one quick thing, and then I need to move on to the lightning round here. But I think ultimately what it comes down to here, with whether it's me or Ryan or Kim or anyone else that I associate with, we're going to have different beliefs. And we have to be able to accept the fact that we're going to have different beliefs. If not, you're going to experience a lot of discontent in your life. However, you probably have similar values. And so even though, like I said, Kim and I, we agree 30 to 60% of the time, but I think our values are going to be very similar, especially our core values. And that's what's really important. And then our values change from there. We have sort of structural values and foundational values, etc. And so I would encourage you to get really clear on what your values are. We have a worksheet on our website. It's free. You can download it. Just go to theminimalists.com/V, and you can download the values worksheet. You can sort of identify what your values are. And I would encourage you to review that with someone that you know, because once you understand who you are, it helps you better understand and express yourself with others without being outraged.
This is absolutely right, because when I think about how I vote, I look at what I value first. And then I look at the candidates. I'm like, okay, who's going to support those values? And it could go either way, and it has for the past several elections, not just the presidential election.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for your question. Check out the values worksheet. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is? It's time for the lightning round, where we answer questions from, your text messages. Text your questions and comments to 937-202-4654.
Yes, indeed. Those texts literally go to both of our phones. which is a lot of fun, and sometimes
Josh just sends me a bunch of eggplant emojis.
We do reply to as many texts as we can, even when it's not on the show. During the lightning round, Kim, this is where Ryan and I and our guest, we do our best to answer questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response.
Oh gosh.
We put the text to these minimal maxims in the show notes so people can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if they'd like. And you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place, minimalmaxims.com. Really, we can just ramble on a bit till we get something pithy. Or not. We can just ramble on in general. Ryan, Laura's got a question for us.
How can we avoid fatigue and maintain civility as citizens in this heated political climate?
Well, here, I'll give you a pithy answer, and maybe we'll unpack it together here. My pithy answer is, a tribe unites against a common enemy, but a community unites around a common cause.
Amen.
So I think right now we do have a lot of tribalism where it's just like, I am with you because we hate the same people.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that bond doesn't last very long, because if all of a sudden you do something, you don't pass my next purity test, now I hate you, Kim. And it's like, but if we're part of a community, we're united around something, then all of a sudden it means, okay, you know what, we don't agree on this, and this, but we have something we can unite around. Do you agree with this?
Yeah. It's the problem is, I think people, what they're uniting around are the morality arguments. And so that's where it gets really, really challenging. It's not so much about uniting over a cause or uniting over, when it gets really personal, because it's morals and it's about, if you don't agree with me, then you're just an immoral person. Mm-hmm. How do you even recover from that?
Right.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think quite often that is many ways that's almost the tribalism that I'm talking about here, because if even if it's a moral stance where and by the way, in a little bit we're going to talk about some things on the maximal, like guns and abortion and a lot of fun things that we can talk about. And I want to do it as an illustration, because I want to prove that you can have these conversations that are difficult conversations without hating someone else, and maybe even disagree with someone and still say, well, hey, I still like you as a person, right?
Yeah.
And even when any of these topics come up, these, what we call them, third rail topics, like we're just terrified to touch on any of these. It's almost like we need more safe spaces. What I mean by that is spaces where we can say, like Ryan and I, if we're just in this room alone, there's literally is not a thing that he and I couldn't talk about.
Right.
Anything. Name the topic, we could talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think we need to make more room, maybe compassion for other people's points of view. Yeah,
if you could just get past because you have that viewpoint, you're now a bad person.
Yeah.
And if you can't get past that, then that's, but if you can actually sit there and say, okay, I can fundamentally believe that you're not a bad person just because you disagree with me on something. I'm not going to automatically call you a racist or, a baby killer or something that's like really awful. Mm-hmm. And that's a real challenging space that we're in right now is that ascribing the morality to the person and then trying to look past that.
Yeah.
Not very many people can do that right now.
It's interesting how I feel like people are motivated to vote based upon what they hate. It's not about what they love. It's almost like, I hate this person, so I'm going to vote against them. And that's unfortunate. My pithy answer is this: political affiliation doesn't matter as much as how you treat the people around you.
Isn't that funny? Because you can say I'm a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Republican or a Democrat or a pescatarian,
mm-hmm.
right? And that tells me something about you, but it doesn't tell me about you.
Yeah. But, we talked earlier about changing the culture, and like that's really how you get a good change in government. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, is how you change the culture. Is it starts with what do you do for your community? What do you do for your friends and your family, your neighbor? Like that's really the only thing we have control over. Like, it doesn't matter who the president is. What matters is how you and I treat each other. And if we could focus on that, that's going to cut through all of this morality policing and this fake outrage, I feel like.
I think it probably does matter who the president is, but it also doesn't matter as much as we pretend it does quite often.
Sure.
And I think...
Well, I mean, especially like I think about certain political candidates. I'm not going to like sit here and get biased, but there are political candidates that are currently in power, running for different positions, that are divisive. Like, their whole campaign is to divide. Mm-hmm. And if that is, if that's what you support, well, then you're being part of that divisiveness, I feel like.
Kim, you I mean, you do a political show on YouTube, and so
do you turn off your YouTube comments or?
No, I read them.
No,
I read them.
yeah.
I think actually I've changed my stance on this recently. I think that's healthy, and here's why. Because I think for the longest time I didn't have the calluses necessary to sort of handle the feedback and the criticism.
Yeah.
And because of that I couldn't differentiate between the two. Criticism just presents a problem. Screw you, you suck, you whatever, I hate the way that your outfit looks, whatever it might be. Like, it's not helpful. Feedback is really helpful. In fact, if I pretend I'm never going to look at any comments or anything, that's going to be a different problem, because then it's like me in the sort of ivory tower thing. But you're saying you read comments because you do get some feedback that might help you challenge your own opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely learn from my comments quite a bit, so I like to read them. I like to see what even the really trashy negative comments that seem to have no value sometimes have some kind of value.
Get something out of it.
Yeah, they might say, I don't like your earrings.
That's the level I want to get to.
Well, I think that's healthy, and it means that you're a strong person to be able to handle that. Because at first, like, it's when you first start working out and like your hands really hurt because you don't have the calluses, right? I think you need the sort of the internet calluses as well.
It took me 3 years, though. Yeah. I will say, when I was doing a talk radio show, I did radio for a really long time, and I would get emails, like hundreds of emails every day. And so many of them were hate mail. And it took me a solid 3 years from when I first started in radio to read those comments, the emails, and try to detach from them emotionally, and to not to allow my energy to absorb that negativity.
Yeah.
So for me, then, when I moved on to YouTube and doing my political show, I had been 10 years on radio of getting all kinds of hate mail, and I still get even emails today that are pretty hateful, but I don't, that stuff doesn't really bother me. I like to hear what people have to say. Even if it's really ridiculous, it's still getting inside their mind a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. I wonder what it is about the human condition where, well, it reminds me of the New Yorker cartoon that you brought on a while back. There was this gentleman on a stage. He had a thought bubble going on. He was just ending his performance. There's a crowd of people in front of him, and they're all giving him a standing ovation except for one guy who's sitting down. He's got his arms crossed, and the thought bubble says, "Oh, I did horrible."
No, it said they all hate me.
Oh yeah, they all hate me. Yeah. So it's like, what is that? It's like one person can ruin your day until you build up those calluses.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't seek the criticism, but I will look at comments. But sometimes, like, I will start reading comments, and I got to stop because I'm like, when I'm like really destroying my day right now if I keep reading these.
And I think the difference is like feedback. So what I'll do is looking for the feedback, I'll go to like our Patreon comments, for example. These are like the 5,000 most fervent supporters of ours, right? And so these are it's not the several 100,000 of people who listen to the podcast. It's like these 5,000 people who have jumped over at least some hoop to get there, and they're a bit more understanding. They also give us more room, but they also give us better feedback.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah. And so sometimes there's like this barrier of entry, or this threshold where you can go seek feedback. Just like right now we're finishing our fourth book, and it's like I'm working with 2 editors on the book. Well, 3 if you count Sean, who is a phenomenal copy editor. And these people are giving like really scathing feedback, and it's hard to deal with. But I'd rather get it from them, these professionals, than, hey, Twitter, what do you think about my new book?
Right.
No, Twitter's the worst. Twitter's the worst.
It's simultaneously the worst and the best.
I don't know.
All right, we got a bunch more to talk about. Before we get into our added value segment and our listener tips today, looks like we got a bunch more surprise questions this week, like how would a minimalist president behave? And we're going to read some mean political tweets. So speaking of Twitter, and we're going to talk about a bunch of hot button issues like climate change and healthcare and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and abortion and guns and more with Kim Iversen. If you want to hear that, check out our Maximal episodes on the Minimalist Private Podcast. It's just a couple bucks, and it's the most honest way for this podcast to earn an income, because we don't believe in advertisements. We think advertisements suck. So we make money only if you find value in and support what we create. Head on over to theminimalists.com/support to subscribe and get your personal link so that our private podcast plays in your favorite podcast app. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
I got some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hi, Josh and Ryan. This is Bianca speaking. I'm calling from the Netherlands. I have a tip for Ryan and his double swimming trunk dilemma, and a travel tip in general, I hope. Ryan told us he didn't like packing an extra set of swimming trunks, just in case the first one got dirty on the trip. Personally, I like to use Dr. Bronner's All-One Cast Iron Soap. I have to add that I am in no way, shape or form affiliated with this company. Dr. Bronner sells pure cast iron liquid soap, which can be used for over 18 different purposes. You can use this to clean your face, body, hair, dishes, laundry, the whole shebang. So while you're traveling, you'll only need this soap. And Ryan, you can hand wash your swimming trunks. I also love this company for using organic and certified fair trade ingredients, plus they're packaged in recyclable bottles. I really like their philosophy on how to treat the earth and their suppliers. I think this will appeal to many fellow minimalists. I hadn't heard a recommendation on Dr. Bronner's soap before, so I hope this will help some of you out there.
Hi, my name is Taylor, and I'm from Tampa, Florida. I was listening to the nostalgia episode, and as someone who's a younger minimalist, I don't have a whole lot of things necessarily, but I did have a lot of T-shirts that I had accumulated from high school and also from college events, and they all do trigger a lot of great memories for me, but they were really clogging up my closet. And so from the transition, after college, I actually took all of the T-shirts and cut them up and made a no-sew blanket. So I'd suggest that anyone who has a lot of T-shirts, that would be a useful way for them to get a use out of them. It's a great size. It's small. I can travel with it when I go across the state or when I get on air. Just keep all those little things that might trigger nostalgia about an event you went to or about maybe a club you joined without having the extra bulk.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Kim Iversen for joining us today. Check her out on YouTube. We'll put a link to her show in the show notes. Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And real quick, for right here, right now, this is one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. Hot off the presses, Ryan.
Yeah.
You can't change the people around you, but you can change the people around you. Isn't that applicable for politics as well? If you're surrounded by a bunch of people where you're like, I really hate their values, then maybe it's time to surround yourself with people who have similar values to you. Definitely. And so we have this little reminder. It's the most beautiful wallpaper we've ever put together. We have 6 or 7 of them on our website right now. It's you can't change the people around you, but you can change the people around you. Wallpaper, you can find that over at theminimalists.com/changepeople. You can find all of our other free wallpapers on our resource page as well. You can download that for free for your smartphone or for your desktop. You can follow The Minimalists on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Minimalist. If you have a question, comment, or minimalism tip for our podcast, email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. Comment on this episode, youtube.com/theminimalists. If you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. You'll also receive our simple Sunday emails each week. For our added value this week, I know I said I was going to stop playing songs, Sean, but don't yell at me. We're going to play a song this week.
The last one.
It's so appropriate.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of getting kicked off of iTunes because we play music all the time. We don't do it on YouTube, but Jordan, maybe you can put a link to this video. It's so good. And the guy's from our hometown. I sent you this video a while ago. It's called My Vote Don't Count.
Oh, yeah.
And
it's a good one.
It's a rapper named Yellow Pain, and he's from Dayton, Ohio. And it is such a great song because he goes into it like, screw these politicians, my vote doesn't count. And then midway through the song, he talks about why. That's sort of the attitude a lot of us have. And he talks about why your vote actually does count. And it is such a phenomenal song. I'm actually trying to get him on the podcast. So
that'd be great.
We can talk
Kim,
about
I'm curious,
this.
what music do you listen to?
I listen to everything. I'm actually a jazz drummer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
awesome.
That's what I studied all through school.
Very cool. What's your
really?
What's your favorite jazz album? Do you have one? I'm asking for myself, really.
You know, I'm
trying to like jazz. I pretend I like jazz, but I haven't listened to enough of it.
I just would say it's one of the standards. I mean, I really like Burning for Buddy, which is a drum-focused jazz album. But
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, it's a lot of awesome drumming on that one. But
awesome.
You got your basics like Miles Davis, Kind of Blue.
I'm more of a Coltrane person myself.
Coltrane's great. Chet Baker. I mean, there's a lot of great jazz artists out there.
Do you got any drumming videos on YouTube?
I don't.
Oh,
I
man.
don't. I know, right?
I think jazz musicians probably have like some of the most talent in the musician world.
I totally agree. I went to audio engineering school. This was back in the 90s, and well, people were still recording on reel to reel. So everything I learned is completely out of date at this point.
It could all be done on our laptops now.
For sure. But I was like, dealing with these ADATs and
God.
reel to reel and these giant 128 channel mixing boards. And anyway, I recorded this jazz trio from Ohio State, and they, as a side project, so they were in there like they had polo shirts on, like tucked into their khakis, and the jazz drummer, and it was this great trio. And then they had a side project for school. It was a death metal band. and so if they had extra time to record, they would record their death metal songs, and it's amazing how it takes the precision. You actually don't understand how, most of us don't understand at least, how much competence is required to play death metal.
Yeah.
Which is shocking to me. I just thought it was noise.
Right. You just make a bunch of noise and scream into the microphone.
Right. It's really talented noise, though.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sure.
This is not noise. Check out My Vote Don't Count by Yellow Pain. It's a single, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. And if you leave here today with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Kim.
The Minimalists.